According to Alan Manning, professor of labor economics at the London School of Economics and Political Sciences, published in American magazine Foreign Affairs, published in January and February of 2018, 25% of all minimum wage hours in 1979 were held by teenagers. However, almost 40 years later, less than 10% of these hours came from teenagers. For most of us, getting a part-time job is part of the process of becoming an adult. When deciding on what job we want, many of us will look at the amount of money we make per hour. America's minimum wage has impacted the economy throughout history. In today's speech, first I will be discussing the history and surrounding laws of minimum wage. Second, I will be discussing the modern day effects of minimum wage. And third, I will be discussing the current debate over increasing minimum wage. To begin, I will discuss the history and surrounding laws of minimum wage in America. America's minimum wage and surrounding laws have undergone many changes over the last century. From the 1930s to 2000s, minimum wage has increased. According to the Congressional Digest, a scholarly publication located in Washington, D.C., published in May of 2013, Congress found that decreased wages caused 1/3 of the U.S. population to be ill-nourished, ill-clad, and ill-housed. According to a separate article from the Congressional Digest, they decided to raise the minimum wage to 25 cents an hour in 1938. After that, it rose to 30 cents an hour for the next 6 years, and then after the Fair Labor Standards Act was implemented, it rose to $2 an hour in 1974. Along with this, the federal government has also implemented more laws to control the pay of workers. The federal government implemented an 8-hour workday, and along with this, they also implemented the Equal Pay Act of 1963. This prohibited one gender from being paid more than the other gender if they worked the same amount of work and worked at the same establishment. Now that I have discussed the history and surrounding laws of minimum wage, I will now discuss the modern day effects of it in our society. Minimum wage has different effects in our society. For one thing, while unable to eliminate poverty, minimum wage has been shown to decrease it by quite a bit. According to Alan Manning, who I have cited before, in Oregon in the late 1990s, they rose minimum wage up, and as a result, it increased hourly wages, and therefore helped workers go from the welfare system into the workforce. Along with this, from Eric A. Whitaker, a political science professor from Western Washington University, published in the Policy Studies Journal in November of 2012, increasing minimum wage to up to $10 per hour can help 16.5 million workers increase their hourly wages. Along with this, minimum wage has also been linked to a worker's self-esteem. According to Brishan Rogers, an associate professor of law at Temple University Beasley School of Law, published in the Texas Law Review of May of 2014, increasing wages has been linked to a higher standard of living. And in 1999, a janitor's wage was increased to $2 per hour. And even though this was not a lot of money, he still quoted, "And with this living wage, I am now able to keep my head up high." Now that I've discussed the modern day effects of minimum wage, I will now go on to discuss my last point, which is the current debate over increasing minimum wage. The current debate over increasing minimum wage has impacted us today. People may support increasing minimum wage because it helps combat inflation. According to Eric A. Whitaker, who I have previously cited, in order to get back to America's minimum wage at its peak value, we would have to go back to 1968. And according to the Congressional Digest, which I have cited before, if we wanted to go back to 1968, we would have to increase our wages to $10 an hour. On the other hand, people may oppose supporting minimum wage because it can lead to higher rates of unemployment. According to Eric A. Whitaker, who I have cited before, increasing wages can decrease the amount of profit that is made and therefore cause more job layoffs. And according to Alan Manning, who I have cited earlier, in Denmark they did a study where they rose minimum wage to $15 an hour, and by doing so, this actually increased unemployment rates by 1/3. In today's speech, I have first discussed the history and surrounding laws of minimum wage. Second, I have discussed the modern day effects of minimum wage. And third, I have discussed the current debate over increasing minimum wage. America's minimum wage has affected the economy throughout history. In the future, many of us will be entering the workforce. And while we may not work minimum wage hours, it's still important to remember how we earn this money and why it's the wage that it is. And while most of us will not be part of the 10% of people who work the lowest amount of hours and wages, I would bet my money on seeing us earn more money and laws in the future.